surprised me in the fact that we're able to reach Category 5 intensity just 3 weeks after Katrina.
Look at this now. They're really
gosh.
going.
I guess
You have something that bad coming, there is no alternative to leaving, not in my mind.
At no time in our history do I ever recall, or is anyone that I've talked to ever recalled, having every transmission line out.
I started praying and asking God to give me the strength to do what I had to do.
Another thing that really struck us was the fact that we looked at all the storms that's formed in that area over 150 years, and not a single one moved as far west as about Pensacola, Florida. They never hit Louisiana, had never hit Texas. So if you look at from the climatology of the storm, you're really going against the odds to say it would come this way.
Hurricane Rita formed on September 18th as the 17th named tropical storm of the 2005 hurricane season. In less than a week, it would strike southeast Texas, after intensifying into one of the strongest storms on record in the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, we were watching that storm. Actually, we took 2 days off after Katrina. We shut down on a Friday afternoon, and we were off Saturday and Sunday. And then Monday, actually, we started tracking this other storm. And indications Monday and Tuesday were fairly consistent that it was going to be a South Texas storm.
Only a few weeks had passed since Hurricane Katrina hit the Louisiana-Mississippi coast, causing catastrophic damage, killing more than 1,000 people and sending thousands of evacuees into southeast Texas.
It was a Category 5 hurricane. It made the big news shows and everything for weeks on end. So everybody was well aware of what a hurricane like that could do. Then you have Rita come along, which actually gets stronger than Katrina. It's generally heading toward the Texas coastline. And Buddy, when you said Category 5, people were ready to move, and we had, in retrospect, tremendous response from the public in evacuation.
We knew 2 or 3 days before the storm hit that it was going to hit somewhere along the Texas coast. And the early preliminary predictions for this storm were that we would be on the worst side of the storm, meaning it would hit somewhere south of us down towards Corpus. So we were prepared for significant damage, began preparing for significant damage.
You know, all day Wednesday we were trying to get people to leave early if they could. We knew there would be a lot of traffic. We knew people were evacuating everywhere from Matagorda into Louisiana, so we knew we'd have a lot of people on the routes, but what actually ended up on the routes was probably beyond anyone's imagination.
Well, we had a big high-pressure center, which is unusual, over the Carolinas, back westward, all the way into Oklahoma. So it had no other recourse. It had to head west. It had no other track that it could take. And just depending on how strong that high would be and how far west it would eventually go. And of course, as it turned out, it was a very strong high, which kept it on that westerly track.
At 6 p.m. on Wednesday, September 21st, Galveston County ordered a mandatory evacuation.
Well, the strength of the high was the key. You know, if the high had stayed very strong, it indeed would have moved well down the coastline toward the Matagorda area, toward Corpus Christi, which was kind of the first target area. But what we started to see happen, particularly on Wednesday, you know, the evacuation started on Thursday. On Wednesday, that high started to weaken a little bit, and then the forecast track started inching up the coast, you know, toward Freeport. Then on Thursday, it's up over, you know, Galveston. So at that point, you know, the public officials had no recourse but to call for an evacuation with a track that close to us.
But it's just gotten too close.
Thursday morning, September 22nd, emergency management officials throughout southeast Texas decided to call for evacuations.
Well, I got a call around about 6:30 that morning, informed me that I need to be at transportation center at 8 o'clock. That we indeed were under mandatory evacuation due to Hurricane Rita. And I was like, okay, well, let me get myself together here and get down to work and see what, you know, instructions they need to give me so that, you know, I can go on and carry out, you know, whatever I need to do.
By mid-morning on Thursday, evacuees jammed the roads leading north out of southeast Texas. The northerly evacuation routes gridlocked as tens of thousands of people from the Houston area flooded in.
Well, basically Thursday I came to work, and we spent that day moving about as fast as we could, trying to set up in different locations, telling people that they needed to leave.
KFDM reporter Kara Stevens began shooting with a home video camera.
Well, we were planning on staying during the storm, so obviously I wanted to document because you know, at all times I wouldn't have a camera with me. So I brought my camcorder just to kind of document the experience because it really was part of history.
There's thousands of people just in Jefferson County alone. We call them special needs, but that falls into a broad category. Some of them are just elderly, they live alone, they don't drive. Nothing wrong with them, they don't have a car. Some of them are just young and poor and don't have a vehicle, no way of getting out. Some of them are sick and on oxygen. You know, they can maneuver around, but they can't leave without their oxygen. Then you have some that are just simply bedridden. They have no way on their own. And as luck would have it, the circumstances just converged all into one situation where it fell to the local elected officials and the emergency first responders to evacuate all these people.
Beaumont school buses and city buses picked up people around the city. Those who couldn't leave aboard a bus were taken to the Beaumont Civic Center and later to the Southeast Texas Regional Airport. Those who could ride a bus boarded at Smith Middle School.
Willeray Smith Middle School, that was the transition point, picking them up there, and we were informed that at 12 noon we will be departing Beaumont, headed for Lufkin, Texas, which is approximately an hour and 20 minutes normal drive time. But due to evacuation orders, it took us almost in excess of 25 to 26 hours just to get to Lufkin.
By mid-afternoon, all available BISD buses, more than 50, had left the city. There were still people who needed out.
We're just having to turn people away. There is no more room on these buses.
We hit a problem when we pulled out of the city when we got on Highway 69 at the Lucas Street exit. It took us 2 hours from Lucas Street entrance ramp to get to Lumberton. And right then and there, I said to myself, we're in for a long night.
The evacuation constantly was in flux, not so much for our end, but from DPS and TxDOT, and they quickly changed the routes, adapted the routes, tried contraflow, which I think I've sat here and told you it would never work. Wrong on that one. They did have some success with it.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt, especially we were looking even at that point, maybe Freeport to Galveston. And as large as Rita was, you can't fool around with that. You're going to have to evacuate, and especially based on the fact that we'd already evacuated with Andrew and Lily when nothing really happened to us. You've got a storm that's going to pass maybe to your west, you know something's going to happen. So I think they made a very wise decision in starting that evacuation when they did. Yeah, the initial, most of the day on Thursday, the track was kind of pointed toward the Galveston area, up toward maybe Chambers County. Obviously a bad scenario for us because it puts us in that eastern portion of the storm. But by, we started seeing indications by Thursday night that maybe that wasn't going to happen. Maybe it's going to be even further east, and we started looking even towards southwest Louisiana at that point, toward Cameron Parish. And obviously that's what happened. It did make landfall just east of the Sabine River.
Well, I have family here, and it was very difficult for them to get on the highway and sit on the highway for hours on end. And that night, we had a meeting at the station, and we discussed how strong the winds would be. And then it put things into perspective. Do you want to think about yourself and stay here and ride out this exciting storm? Or do you want to make sure that your family's safe? And I thought the best thing for me to do was to ensure that my mother and my elderly grandfather were in a safe place and then come back.
Thursday night, Kara Stevens decided to help her family evacuate.
We were just at a standstill. We were parked for hours. I moved less than 2 miles in about 4 hours, and I realized that you just can't sit there. You just can't sit there forever. You fill up your tank before you leave, and then you haven't gone, 20 miles, and you've already used half a tank of gas. And that's where you started to see the desperation. People were running out of gas. There were no gas stations, did not have any fuel. At that point, they didn't have food. People were sleeping on the side of major highways, and it was very similar to the video we saw in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina.
Pretty much on the bus that I drive, which is bus 325, it's equipped with AM, FM radio and air conditioning. So the passengers were pretty much well, calm, they were cool, we were able to keep them cool. Some of them did bring snacks to snack along the way. So they pretty much, my passengers on my bus were pretty much comfortable with the situation, and we were just watching things as they creep along.
While many Southeast Texans were trapped in traffic, tired and running out of gas in East Texas, another difficult situation developed at home. Thousands of people with no way out.
As it was pointed to Matagorda and everybody thought it was going there, well, you know, they have special needs people too. And all of the resources that were contracted for our area evidently were contracted in those areas too. And then the state stepped in and commandeered some of the resources and directed them to South County. And as they were moving those people, and it's understandable, I'm not being critical of that, we would be doing the same thing. Well, all the resources went to that area, then in a matter of hours a storm turns and we have to move our people, and you just cannot redeploy those resources that quickly. And at that point we started getting calls from the hospitals and nursing homes that, we cannot handle these people. We don't have the ambulance. They've all gone to the Matagorda, so what are we going to do with these people? So we had to scramble fairly quickly to come up with a plan. And as it turned out, Judge Griffith and the mayors of the cities made contact with Washington, telling them, hey, here's what happened. We need to get these people out of here.
U.S. military cargo planes flew into the Southeast Texas Regional Airport. People were flown to destinations around the country, some of them needing constant medical care. Christus St. Elizabeth nurses boarded the planes with their patients, uncertain of their destination. 8,000 people were flown out of Southeast Texas.
I'll quote the colonel that was in charge of it, and I'll never forget this quote because he's involved in a lot of emergency operations. He said, "We have never moved this many people in this short of time with this little help." So it was a quite amazing undertaking by the military.
Meanwhile, bus driver Shelton Boyce and the convoy of buses continued to inch through East Texas.
Yeah, we saw some stalled vehicles, mainly due to the gas situation. Cars running out of gas, pulling on the side of the road, and then some passengers, evacuees, I should say, were just pulled over the side of the road just to be pulled on the side of the road just to see the traffic creep along.
Well, my grandfather, his gas tank was a little smaller than mine and than my parents' car, and he was running low on fuel. And we were stopping at gas station after gas station because there were lots of people there, but they were waiting for gas. They were waiting for a truck to come fill up the tanks. And, we had probably gone to 8 or 10 gas stations, and then finally I said, look, we're going to find a gas station looks safe. We're going to leave your truck here, and we're just going to go on without it. And it just happened to be that the gas station we stopped when we were leaving his car, a gas truck rolled in, and it was quite a sight.
At 3 o'clock on Friday morning, Carol rolled videotape at this gas station. People all around were camped out in their cars, waiting for gas and other supplies.
You start having selfish feelings. You think, okay, well, I have one case of water. I need to make sure that my family gets that. And it was pretty scary. I've never been somewhere where you could not get the things you need. By
sunrise Friday morning, the situation aboard the school buses was growing more desperate.
Unfortunately, we had a fatal accident. We were instructed by the Lufkin police department to go into a certain area to use the restroom because the shelters were full once we got there. You had the folk from Houston and Galveston that had gotten there before us, which left us with no shelter. So we just told them we want to use the restroom, and as 81-year-old lady, she was walking across the street coming back from using the restroom, was struck and fatally killed by a vehicle.
News on the home front was improving. Rita might spare Southeast Texas a direct hit.
That was really good news. We felt real confident Friday morning that was going to go into Cameron Parish, probably between Sabine Pass and Cameron. That indeed did happen. Now, what that meant for us when we were looking at the storm, we knew we were going to have damage. I mean, you've got a big hurricane, large wind field. You're going to see winds of over 100 miles per hour, and that certainly happened. But what we wanted to have happen to us was to avoid, to a large degree, the storm surge. Now, folks in Sabine Pass will beg to differ. Yeah, they had storm surge. But when you look at the damage that was done in Cameron Parish from a 20-foot storm surge, it is real sobering to think what would have happened here if, Rita had tracked further west.
The roads out of Beaumont were now nearly empty. In Koontz, stragglers were trying to get gas. Gas stations left the pumps on for anyone with a credit card. The school buses continued to meander from town to town in East Texas, looking for shelter for 2,000 people.
We went over to the high school in St. Augustine. They had hot meal for, they didn't expect that many people, so they basically ran out of food once we got there. And when we arrived in St. Augustine, little did we know we were really headed for some trouble there, because eventually we ended up getting court-ordered out of St. Augustine.
As the evacuation pushed away from the coast, a bus carrying 45 Houston nursing home evacuees caught fire on Interstate 45 southeast of Dallas. 23 people died.
Friday, pretty much of a blur. We knew traffic was on the road. Harris County traffic is all on 69 going north. We knew everything was log jam. We knew it was a slow process, but we also knew that we had plenty of time because we started an early evacuation. So we knew that even if somebody was on the road for 15 hours, they had time to get out safely, and that's your number one goal. Always try to save as many lives as you can.
Kara, her mother, and grandfather arrived in College Station before sundown Friday night after talking their way through roadblocks.
Once everyone was safe, we all were evacuated, we were living in cramped quarters, not the ideal situation, then it started to sink in that it could be just devastating. We could come home to nothing, and we could be living like evacuees for weeks, and it's very scary.
Probably 4 or 5 hours of these hurricane force winds before Rita moves northward and finally begins to weaken as it moves over land. There's no other storm like a hurricane. Tornadoes obviously can produce much stronger winds, but they last for such a brief moment and they affect such a small area. But a hurricane is almost an animal when it's coming in. It reminds me when the winds are blowing like there's demons howling. That's what it sounds like. It's hard to describe the sound, but it sounds like it's alive. And it just goes on for hours and hours. And that's something that people who haven't gone through a hurricane really can't get in their mind that that's what happens. They think it's just a storm that lasts a few hours, it's over, you pick up the pieces. No, it's a long event.
Friday night, those who stayed braced for the storm. Beaumont Police positioned its vehicles at the Christus St. Elizabeth parking garage while officers rode out the storm in the hospital.
The hurricane winds make it difficult to stand, but fortunately there's one building in Beaumont that authorities deemed safe enough to make it their emergency command center.
Jefferson County Emergency Management set up operations at the Edison Plaza in downtown Beaumont.
Well, it was quite a ride in the building. That building is rated for 150 mile-an-hour winds, or so they tell us. And of course it was dark, and it wasn't very long. I would say 2 hours into the storm, the electricity went out. So hard to see. Could hear the wind. Could hear some of the windows on the upper floors breaking out. So you could hear the glass literally falling, and pretty noisy, by the way. And the double doors, glass doors in the first floor that lead into the cafeteria area blew in, creating a problem down there. And at some point, the windows would pulsate in and out. And at one point, we literally, when the breaking of the glass got so bad, we moved into the stairwells, not knowing, exactly what was going to happen.
Greg Bostwick, along with KFDM News staff Bill Leger, Sally McDonald, Scott Lawrence, and Dan Gresham, rode out the storm in the high-rise building, along with dozens of Beaumont firefighters, energy employees, and media from outside the area.
It sounds kind of crazy to say this, but I was a little bit disappointed it happened at night because I wanted to see what the wind was doing. We could see glimpses, with some lights that were on early. Of course, when it got pitch black, you really can't see much of anything. But we knew damage was happening, but we just didn't know how much. And it was frightening because you could hear things hitting buildings we were in. You could hear things breaking apart, but you didn't know exactly what was happening because you couldn't see it.
Well, the wind was howling. It was amazing to watch the wind and what it was doing to the rain. I mean, literally the rain was traveling. It would appear to me to be horizontally rather than falling vertically. There was a lot of wind and debris. Of course, a lot of the storm itself and the worst part of the storm was in darkness. so it's hard to see what was going on. The building itself did make some creaks and some noises, but it never did give any indication that it was of any sort of danger of itself having some structural problems. At no time did I feel unsafe in this building because of the precautions we had taken.
Kara Stevens, like many Southeast Texans, watched national hurricane coverage many miles from her home.
Well, you know, watching the news that night, I kept flipping between every station I could. A lot of the national networks went live all night long. And, you know, they were really the lifeline to people who had evacuated. And you want to see, it looked as though it was pretty devastating.
The Elegante Hotel also sheltered reporters and media crews. Rita's fury blew out windows from the ground up.
I was laying on this bed and take us in.
KLVI and its sister Clear Channel stations broadcast throughout the night and would provide continuous coverage for days on end. The 2,000 Beaumont evacuees aboard the 50 buses were still on the road and looking for shelter as Friday turned into Saturday morning.
We're pulled over on Interstate 259 North at 2:30 in the morning, not knowing what is going on. You got 50 buses sitting on 259 plus personal vehicles that had been following us all along. And we're just like in a world of, hey, what's going on? Dumbfounded, in other words. And we got a word saying that we were going to go to Canton from there. And at one point, we actually had other people who not employed by the district that hold the CDL license that were driving for us because some of the drivers just couldn't go anymore.
I fully expected Saturday morning when it became daylight that I would look out of those windows and see the entire Beaumont downtown area flooded is what I was anticipating. And then, because at this point we had no way of tracking the storm with the electricity and everything. And at that point did not know that it had taken a jog to the east. We were fully expecting landfall, you know, a direct hit. And then when it was daylight and we looked out and didn't see any flooding, I thought, this is not too bad. We need to get out and start looking around. So we got a dump truck and we started driving. We probably left too early. You know, we tell people don't drive in these high impact winds, and here we are driving around these probably still gale force or stronger winds doing a damage survey. And there was a lot of damage, it was widespread but not extremely severe. So that was a great relief that, hey, you know, we didn't come out of this thing as bad as we thought we may, and I began to wonder, well, was it a Category 3 or not? You know, what happened? Because this is not typically Category 3 damage. Then as we were getting more information, you know, we found out that, hey, yeah, we did get some 120-mile-an-hour winds, but the majority of the severe damage in the storm surge was well east of us.
Hurricane Rita officially made landfall at Johnson's Bayou in Louisiana at 2:38 Saturday morning, September 24th, as a Category 3 storm.
Quite honestly, this may be surprising to hear this, the lack of damage, because this was happening at night. And our assumption was that what we saw around downtown, which was a fair amount of damage, was happening on a much bigger degree elsewhere, because these are fairly substantial buildings downtown, but we're getting some damage from them. So we were thinking, my goodness, if these buildings here are being damaged, what is it like in the residential areas of all the trees? You know, we saw quite a bit of damage when we got out Saturday morning, but I was really surprised at the lack of total destruction. I was expecting to see house upon house flattened. Didn't see that. I saw some roofs missing. I saw trees down, and really that was the main thing. If a tree crossed your house, you had problems, but most folks, you know, did reasonably well considering the type of winds we had.
The storm tracked through East Texas with hurricane-force winds extending as far north as Toledo Bend. Saturday morning, Southeast Texans ventured from their shelters to survey the damage.
Trees knocked my little fence down here, and it's nothing major, nothing real major.
like I said, it was just a couple of holes in the old roof that I need to replace anyway.
I said, man, I wish I would have left with my brother, because my brother came to get my mom, and I said, I wish I would have left with him instead of staying behind. And it was unreal. And when I was sitting at the table, I was smoking my last cigarette, and all of a sudden that one came through the ceiling. I said, oh man, Lord help me out of this, and I'll never do anything again.
Southeast Texans began cutting paths through the downed trees, and energy crews began assessing the damage to the power system.
I've been through storms before. Lived on the Gulf Coast all my life. I've been through a lot of storms. This particular storm did more to our power system than I would have ever imagined. It actually caused damage, significant enough damage to knock the electrical system completely down from about the Trinity River, roughly, maybe a little bit west of the Trinity River, but roughly the Trinity River, as far east as just a little east of Munnings, Louisiana, maybe towards Lafayette. So every electrical transmission line, although it might not have been on the ground, during the storm, debris, trees, or even a structure failure in some cases, caused all of those lines to actually be taken out of service automatically by the protective equipment. So when the storm was, the winds were dying down and we were looking at kind of the status of the system, it was somewhat unnerving to see how much damage had been done, and the plan that we would have to implement and put in place to get power up to an area that basically was totally black. Had no power plants feeding into it, no transmission lines really connecting to any extent to the outside world.
Power lines and poles throughout the area were down across roads along with trees and debris. Southeast Texas had come to a standstill. But the situation for the bus evacuees was finally turning.
We arrived in Canton at about 6:30 Saturday morning. So now you have people that have not been asleep since 12 noon Thursday the 22nd until 6:30 Saturday morning the 24th, the day Rita hit our area. And when we got to Canton, they had food waiting on us. They had medical personnel waiting on us. They had places where we can go and take showers and, you know, just try to help us out and do the best that they could, because they had heard all what we had been through thus far.
Now tens of thousands of displaced Southeast Texans wanted to know what happened and when they could come home.
Well, my father actually called about my parents' home, and they were told, looks great, no problems at all. Well, so, you know, we celebrated a little bit and went on with our day. Later that afternoon, we received a call that someone had actually walked to the backyard of the house and didn't look as nice as the front. A tree had fallen on the house, and we had quite a bit of roof damage in the back. And we felt as though it would be in our best benefit to come down, patch up the roof as best we could, and then waited until electricity and water came back before we started living there again.
Those who stayed found they had few resources. No stores to buy food, no water services, no power, and some no longer had shelter.
Me and the two grandbabies stayed in the house. We slept in here on a mattress because my roof in the bedroom fell in. The windows started blowing out, which is why that mattress is over there against the windows. Them windows are falling out.
All I just heard a big noise, say, wow. And I was in my bed, I jumped under my bed, almost, you know.
Pick almost any street in Southeast Texas, and you could find trees that crashed down on houses.
Miserable, scared to sleep. Don't know if it could, you know, cave in or not. So, and I done called 911, but they came out, they just looked at it, just told me they gonna try to get shelter.
Or wind that ripped apart buildings.
This is what we've already made stacks of. Look at this room, we haven't gotten here yet. I can't even hardly open the door, but this will tell you something. Look in that room. Wait, I know. Go. And step over here and you'll be surprised what's in there. I mean, this is just...
And we said, you know, we better get out of this building.
The Snells rode out the storm in their van.
Yeah, a lot of them were scared, and a lot of them realized fully when they woke up Saturday morning, I don't have any supplies. I have nothing. I can't even leave now because there's no gasoline. I mean, there was no gasoline here for days, nothing. So you couldn't leave town because you couldn't fill up your car. You had no water. You had no electricity. It's not much fun. It's far better to be up country somewhere where you've got the amenities we rely on. So you realize that maybe you made a bad decision if you stayed.
I wrote the storm out in that building next to you without the roof. There's too much glass here. And the glass started blowing out on the other side over there. And I decided that I'll go over there to this building here. And it was hard to do. And about 25 minutes later, the roof come off of it. And I was just like a rabbit just sitting in there with nowhere to go, you know? It was a trip, man. It really was. Like I said, I would never ride another one out like that. It just ain't happening.
This community,
Elected officials made it clear, if you're here, get out. If you're out, stay away.
And meeting with the cities, you know, hey, pump the sewer stations, lift stations, those are out. We have no water. Even when we do get water, if we get it back in 4 or 5 days, you can't drink it for 7 to 10 days after that. And we're thinking, well, you know, just like we always anticipated, a hit from a major storm, people are going to be out of the area for 2 or 3 weeks. So we knew that right away.
Evacuations continued after the storm. Patients who didn't make it out the day before and new ones who arrived after the storm were evacuated to Houston Saturday morning as ambulances became available. This home video captured military helicopters evacuating people in Spurger. With no power, water and sewer systems were in jeopardy of failing. Power is critical to sustaining a population.
We actually start immediately after the winds are safe enough to get people out into the area. And we start with, we're doing a number of things all at the same time. We are sending damage assessment crews, engineers, engineering type expertise out to look at the damage. At the same time we're doing that, we're calling in the crews that had gone to safe places. And we also had crews coming well ahead of the storm from as far away as Minnesota, New Mexico, California, New England. We're making arrangements with our logistics folks to get tents, sleeping quarters, cots for people, caterers. All of those have been pre-arranged, and now we're pulling the trigger to say it's time to come.
Roadblocks went up almost immediately after the storm. People were both trying to get in and to get out. Sharon Broder ran out of gas after coming back into the area to check on her home in Port Neches. She ended up on the side of the road near Mauriceville after trying to get to Ford Park.
I didn't get to Ford Park. The trooper told me to go down to Ford Park. They would let us go to Ford Park and we could be evacuated on buses. We went to that exit. The trooper there said, no one's exiting here. Ford Park is full. They're not taking anybody.
A few miles away, neighbors were making the best of a situation in a common site following the storm. They were cooking the now thawing contents of a freezer. This nurse worked through the storm at Christus St. Elizabeth Hospital and now found her plans were on hold.
We were to be married at 5 p.m. yesterday and be on our honeymoon.
In New Orleans.
In New Orleans. And we canceled that honeymoon and rescheduled for Kemah until the storm turned to Kemah, so we canceled that honeymoon. So we said, we'll just get married.
Did you get married?
No, we couldn't. Then I was working at the hospital. So the wedding got canceled too.
She was leaving the area and rescheduling her wedding.
It took a while at first. It was slow coming in. You know, FEMA does pre-position resources, the state pre-positions resources, and they were pre-positioned, and the goal was to bring the resources to Ford Park, and from there we would feed the police and the fire and the substations to get all of that stuff up and operating. Again, didn't go as planned, not because of anything that anyone did wrong. Is in the interim, while we're waiting for this stuff to come in, Ford Park becomes an impromptu shelter, just people showing up. and you can't turn them away. And then we started getting a lot of people over there and couldn't keep them there because it was damaged and there was no electricity. So they set up, it was kind of a relay station. If people showed up there with no place to go, they stayed there till a bus came in and picked them up and took them to San Antonio.
As with Hurricane Katrina, Ford Park once again became a makeshift disaster central. Charles Smith made his way with his wife and baby to Ford Park after riding out the storm in Port Neches.
Were you scared?
To be honest, yeah. I try not to tell too many people that, but yeah. I mean, what do you do when the possibility of your entire house falling on you is there? Because it happened in New Orleans, so it was possible.
Jobless and homeless, he wanted out and hoped to make it to California. Supplies arrived at Ford Park, but so did people who needed them.
Well, guess what? When the food and ice and water showed up, the people are hungry and thirsty. So all the resources designated for police and fire and all that were quickly consumed by the people at Ford Park, and that's understandable. And so it took time to build up that relay and get more resources in. But it was rocky getting it started. But you always know that in emergency management, you always tell yourself and everybody else involved, if you have a major disaster, up to about 72 hours, it's your baby.
With no help coming in from the outside, Port Arthur Police and Fire set up its own canteen operation at Sanderson's restaurant.
You got guys sleeping on floors in the academy right now. You got guys that haven't checked on their houses that have lost everything. So it's a must that we get it done.
You're good. Kara Stevens made her way back to Beaumont and continued to document her experience.
I have a friend who is a postal inspector, and he's the one that kind of drove me around the city, directed me through, because it got to the point where streets that you were very familiar with, Folsom, Dallin, Gladys, didn't look anything. It appeared as though it was like a forest. You could not see the streets.
She made a stop at the U.S. Post Office on Walden Road.
There was no electricity in the city, and it was so dark. Could not see anything but the occasional lights of an ambulance, and you could hear chickens. When you stuck your flashlight in the chicken box, you noticed that there were only a few that were still alive, and it kind of put things into perspective. Because at that point there was not a count of how many people had survived the storm. You saw some homes that were leveled next to some homes that had no damage, and you weren't really sure if the people who had the home that was damaged were able to evacuate and escape. So it was a time of not knowing really what was going to happen next. Are we going to get electricity? Are all the chickens going to die? It was kind of symbolic of the situation.
And a lot of that, the aftermath of the storm, it doesn't sink in until it actually happens, when we actually have a storm hit. Because when I speak to groups over the last 26 years I've spoken to, we always talk about hurricanes and hurricane preparedness. And one of the things I always emphasize, if we evacuate in a storm, and we, of course, will have to evacuate again, this won't be the last evacuation we'll ever have, you need to prepare for the fact that you will not come back for many days, maybe weeks. And I don't think that ever sunk in. People didn't understand that could happen because they always related this to Andrew and Lily, where yes, you did come back the next day. Everything was back to normal. It wasn't this time. It took weeks for everything to get to some semblance of normalcy. Electricity was out, water was out, on and on.
Entergy continued to bring in workers, a number that would reach 10,000. But the power company faced a major problem. It had no electricity coming in from the outside.
We were able to plot a course of transmission that had some minimal damage to get the distribution voltage up to the substation where we could get the power off of the 500 kV and started flowing into Texas. And that happened to be just north of Beaumont, actually north of Lumberton, in a large 500 kV station there called Cypress. So some of the first people to get lights happened to be along that stretch of 69 feeding up to Cypress substation, because that was some distribution power we needed in Cypress to get the substation going.
The damage in southeast Texas was widespread, the result of wind, but not storm surge, except in Sabine Pass.
Well, we got here yesterday, which I've lost track of my days, so I don't know what day it is. We got here yesterday about 8 o'clock in the morning with the Oklahoma search and rescue crew from Edmond, Oklahoma. and we were able to make it through. The water was still high, but we made it through. When we first got here, we were just stunned at the devastation here, although we knew it was going to be bad.
They found a boat blocking the road. A rescue team from Oklahoma moved the boat out of the way. FEMA searched the area and found no fatalities, but 2 people reportedly stayed in Sabine Pass and rode out the storm.
When the Coast Guard got here, right before we got here, they were actually driving the streets over their PAs, and there was one gentleman who just came out. He was totally incoherent, just babbling, and so they had an ambulance and EMS team with them, so they immediately trucked him out. And when we pulled up an hour later, there was a gentleman here just standing here with a fishing pole and a tackle box. And we initially came up, thought he had already drove into the city, but he said he rode it. He tried to ride it out, I think, in the hotel, and ended up pushing his way into the high school, and that's how he survived it.
The fact that the storm tracked to the east of southeast Texas undoubtedly spared the area from catastrophic damage.
It's a huge difference. The eye of the hurricane actually came in at Johnson's Bayou, which is about midway between Sabine Pass and Cameron. And it's about 15 miles east of the border. If the hurricane had just tracked, let's say, 30 miles, 25 miles further west, let's say around Sea Rim or down toward Highland, the whole scenario would have been different. I mean, we'd had tremendous storm surge, which would undoubtedly overtop the levees in Port Arthur. And places like Bridge City would have been just inundated by seawater. And again, we had had a New Orleans type scenario here for Port Arthur.
Within days of the storm, generators were in wide use throughout the area, adding both comfort and a potential threat. In Beaumont, 1 adult and 5 children died of carbon monoxide poisoning from a generator running inside an apartment. As shock wore off, reality set in. Hurricane Rita had left southeast Texas almost unlivable. No food, no water, no fuel, and unbearable heat. But help rolled in.
When the traffic die down, you're going to be at station number 5, and they're going to take care of you. They're going to give you ice, MRE, and some water. And
Need it.
Oh yeah. How you doing?
Doing good.
That's good.
Here in Orange, a faith-based group brought in water and ice. National Guardsmen provided the manpower.
All right, y'all good to go. Y'all have a good day.
I mean, they were scared. They come in here. We just try to, just serve them, tell them it's going to be all right, and just give them whatever they need.
In Kirbyville, a FEMA truck with ice.
My house is all to pieces. I don't have anywhere to go. I'm scared, I'm frightened. There's trees in my house.
Yeah, thank you for shopping at Brooks's and come back
to get some food to make you feel a little better to know you.
Oh yes, it makes me feel a whole lot better.
Just down the road, a Brookshire Brothers grocery store opened.
And we don't have everything to offer, but I had them deliver me 1,400 loaves of bread, so I've got plenty of bread, and they get water and stuff at the Baptist church. And in Beaumont South Park, George McCurley cooked in his front yard.
So like I say, we're just trying to make a bad situation right. The ones that stand here, neighbor-wise, we all looking out for one another and stuff. If one person go get some ice, we'll take one vehicle and everybody put their coolers in it. The next time another person go, we'll take another vehicle and stuff like that. So everybody.
3 days after the storm, President Bush landed at the Southeast Texas Regional Airport.
I just met with local county judges and mayors along with the governor. Obviously this area is hurting. The governor knows that. I saw firsthand how it's hurting. We got some priorities that we're in the process of working together to achieve.
The president then boarded a helicopter and surveyed the damage from the air. In a few short days that seemed like an eternity, the power started coming on.
There we go. It's on.
Actually, it was interesting. We had, lights went out everywhere sometime Saturday morning. Basically, it was all, when the hurricane was making its way north and the damage had been done, there were no lights anywhere. And so that first night, it's surprising how dark it can be when there are no lights. The only lights you did see were where there might have been emergency generators. And so for Sunday and Monday, there were no lights. It was dark. And we first began getting power into downtown Beaumont and started getting some of the lights on in downtown. This downtown area, Crockett Street, trying to get power to some of the city's facilities for water and for sewage. when those lights first came on, it was a great relief, and there was a lot of smiles on a lot of employees' faces looking out of the windows of this building to see those lights come on and the city finally get lit up.
The Beaumont evacuees were scattered into shelters hundreds of miles from their homes. Shelton Boyce had one more run to make.
Once we dropped those folk in De Leon, Texas, we were instructed that we were bringing the buses back into Beaumont, which lifted a heavy burden off my shoulders, if you know what I mean. And we went on in, we drove into De Leon, Texas at around about 12:30, 1 o'clock, because it was approximately a 2-hour drive from where we were. And we got the people there situated into the shelter, and we got back on the road and was headed for home. Once we got back into the city limits of Beaumont, we had to pull over at Ford Park because we were still under the 7 to 7 curfew. So it was about 11:30 when we arrived at Ford Park, and we got a night's rest at Ford Park, and we got up the next morning, and we drove the buses on into the transportation center, got in our vehicles, and that ends the story.
Entergy restored power to some 760,000 customers in 3 weeks.
I have to take my hat off to every one of the employees. The Entergy employees that worked, some had damage to their homes, and in spite of damage to their homes, they were out there getting power on to other people's homes. The folks that came in from other places, and the collective, I guess, work of all of those, some 10,000 people at the peak, is what enabled us to get the power on as quickly as we did. And you don't move 10,000 people in without a lot of pre-planning. So there's a lot of folks in the offices that actually were not there turning the wrenches and getting the breakers thrown to get the lights on out in the field, that were behind the scenes supporting all of those workers. It was really like setting up a city of 10,000. And initially we had no water. Remember, we had no electricity, the hotels, no place for them to sleep. So you have to set up all of those little cities for these individuals. And so being able to support them, having that number down here that could have their needs met during the evening, and it's a 24-hour-a-day operation.
An estimated 2.5 million people evacuated from Hurricane Rita.
If you're facing a major storm, next time people will know, hey, I may not come home for 2 or 3 weeks. That $200 I brought with me probably needed to be $2,000. I had 2 days of my prescription medication left. I should have gotten it filled before I left. I sure wish I'd have got those air mattresses out of the garage and brought. Everybody in their mind will be reviewing their experience and thinking of, well, if we have to do it again next time, I'm going to do it better. And I think if we'd have to do it again, we will do it better.
The storm caused almost $5 billion in damage.
And looking at all the damage I've seen, in general, most of the damage is Category 1 damage. Winds of 80 to 100 miles per hour in that range. And going over to Southwest Louisiana, which I have done, you can definitely see a ramp up of the damage there, where you're seeing true Category 2 and 3 damage, where total structures have failed, and large buildings have failed, like around Hackberry, south of Lake Charles. So that's where the really strong winds were located. So we really dodged a bullet. It's hard for somebody to recognize that if you have damage at your house, but it could have been so much worse than what we saw.
119 people died as a result of the storm.
So I think if you wanted to make a checklist of what is the worst possible scenario, well, let's see. The routes are designed for 300,000. We have 2.5 million. All of our shelters, they all have Katrina victims in our shelters. Well, that's okay. We'll get help from Hardin and Newton and Jasper. Those people are all evacuated. So everything that you kind of plan and think that's going to be there or available, a mad scramble, in all the 16 counties along our evac routes, a mad scramble to adapt and adjust, as we went along. And I know people got tired and they got frustrated and they were angry, and I understand all that. But the thing that, I just like to bottom line it, the number one goal, let's get our people out of here alive. And to don't have as few deaths as we had for a Category 3 hurricane, pretty remarkable.
Hurricane Rita is now forever a part of Southeast Texas history. A reminder how quickly lives can turn upside down. It can happen again, and it could be worse.
No, it was not the big one. The big one is the one that comes in that has that 20-foot storm surge like they had in Cameron. Now you can ask the people in Cameron Parish, was this the big one? And they can say, yeah, I mean, it wasn't the worst they could have, but as far as they were concerned, this was in reality a more significant storm than Audrey in 1957. Now you say, well, why do you say that? Well, the storm surge was actually larger. It covered more of an area. It produced more wind damage. But they didn't have a death toll in this one. That's right, because people moved. In 1957, they did move, 500 die. That's the difference. The evacuation plans were so much better this time around and were implemented in such a way that people got out of the way. So people in Cameron Parish, yeah, they went through a big one. We missed it. We could be next.